Hey, normally this is the part where I'd play the thing saying, give me money, give me money, give me money, but instead, for the next little while, there's going to be some charities down in the description for some really important stuff. Give them money instead, okay? Thank you. On with the show. As I was playing through Visions of N'Zoth and got to that one cutscene where Magni lavishes the player in praise for being a champion of Azeroth, I noticed something. See, after Sylvanas leaves the Horde, all her loyalists supposedly bent the knee to Thrall and his gaggle of Alliance bootlickers, meaning you get to continue being a respected champion of the Horde and, later on, a champion of Azeroth. Problem is that my character looks like this. She's basically wearing an entire Banshee fan club getup, all while everyone is yammering on about how great and noble she is. And in Shadowlands, where the champion is the only person who can enter and exit the Maw at will, and therefore the only hope Azeroth has to stop Sylvanas, I'm gonna find this absolutely hilarious. Let's talk about player agency. So in WoW, there's a major character on both factions called the Champion, the Horde Champion and the Alliance Champion respectively. This is how the game addresses the player and indeed every player. There are many players in WoW, but for the sake of the story, there is only one champion. The Champion is a famed and legendary hero of their faction, and that makes sense to a degree. By the time of Battle for Azeroth, the Champion has stood against many critical threats to the world, like the Burning Legion, the Old Gods, the Scourge, the Old Gods again, the Black Dragonflight, the Blue Dragonflight, the Infinite Dragonflight. No, this does not make sense if you play the game. Trust me, I'm as confused as you are. The Old Gods again, the Iron Horde, the Burning Legion again, the Old Gods again, and of course, the single greatest threat to Azeroth to have ever existed, the Alliance. Players often complain that their characters are too lauded and praised these days, but it makes sense that they are after doing, all of that. I need to establish this because the Champion is the problematic element in WoW's story. I'm going to be portraying the Champion in this video as a single character, namely this Blood Elf warrior, for the sake of consistency as well as highlighting how fucked Blizzard has made things for themselves. So when WoW started, the adventurers were a nameless group, mercenaries, soldiers, that sort of thing. It was a pretty open-ended story and you were really just helping out and doing the legwork for your faction. But this was also at a time when the main characters in WoW were all just sorta hanging out and not doing much. Most of them didn't even have real character models. Throughout most of classic WoW, the threats you would have to face were largely unconnected with each other. The Fire Lord, a big dragon, another big dragon, Cthulhu, and the Scourge were about it. Also some trolls. It wasn't until Wrath of the Lich King where all of this started to change. Characters like Thrall, Jaina, Varian, Garrosh, and Sylvanas had been promoted to actually having a role in the story, but so had the Champion. When she first arrives in Northrend, her achievements in Outland during the Burning Crusade were mentioned regularly. Little would come of it until Miss Pandaria, where the Champion was the actual main character of the expansion. So much so, she gets her own legend in Lore Walker Show's Fun Storytime Extravaganza. Warlords of Draenor took this even further as she was given control of an entire assault force against the Iron Horde. So instead of answering to someone like she usually does, now she's the one in command. In Legion, this got even worse as she's now the leader of her entire class order. By the end of Legion, the Champion had slain the Illidari, the Burning Legion twice, the Lich King, Deathwing the Destroyer, at least 3 Old Gods, literally all of the Legacy Warcraft 1 and 2 characters, 2 actual Titans which are supposed to be unkillable by mortals, and millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of mooks and soldiers for all of those groups. So by the time of Battle for Azeroth, the Horde's Champion has become so renowned that not only is she trusted to wield the powers of a Titan, but all the factions at play are essentially fighting over who gets custody of the literal walking harbinger of death and destruction, now with new Titan powers trademark. Where this gets interesting is the fate of Saurfang quest, where Zakan tells her that Sylvanas is going to have Saurfang killed instead of returned to Orgrimmar. But if you side with Zakan, the Dark Ranger trying to flush him out is actively giving him the choice to come quietly. And when she decides not to side with Zakan, Sylvanas tells her pretty much the same thing and even admits that they will kill him if he refuses to come quietly. And why is she not involved in apprehending Saurfang? Because her reputation and fame needs to be preserved because it's an important resource. Your loyalty will not go unrewarded, Champion. Lyanna departed here only moments ago. I have dispatched the Dark Ranger and a contingent of loyal Death Guard to apprehend the traitor Saurfang in Swamp of Sorrows. He may come peacefully, or he may not. Your hands should not, in any case, be bloodied in this confrontation. You are to remain a hero, golden in the eyes of the people, as we have need of. I point this out not to do another Sylvanas being a villain is a stupid story thing, though believe me, I want to, but rather to highlight the fact that the Champion is supposedly so famed and so beloved in the eyes of the Horde that her reputation is a critical resource to Sylvanas. Which is why much of the Revolutionary campaign falls by the wayside, because it ultimately brushes up against one critical question. Between these two characters, who is the more respected and legendary hero to the Horde? Saurfang, or the champion. Because if the champion is as famed and respected as nearly every single major character makes her out to be, seriously, in Shadowlands Jaina calls her one of Azeroth's greatest heroes, wouldn't her choice of who to support ultimately be the final nail in the coffin? If the champion sided with Saurfang, declared Sylvanas to have gone over the line and must be removed from power, that should be a devastating blow to Sylvanas' status as war chief and any claim she makes of treason. Alternatively, if Sylvanas claims Saurfang as a traitor to the Horde and a puppet of the Alliance, and she goes along with it, wouldn't that naturally result in Saurfang's revolution being completely and totally crippled, especially when he shows up in Orgrimmar backed by the Alliance? One of the legendary heroes of the Horde has been branded a traitor and shows up with the Alliance and a small gaggle of people he's managed to wrangle to his support, but another, more legendary hero of the Horde is standing right beside the war chief and unwavering in her loyalty. If you're a random Horde citizen and two of the Horde's greatest heroes offer differing opinions of the war chief, who do you believe? This is where Blizzard hamstrings themselves, because the moment the story has to act on all of these things, the champion is suddenly no longer relevant. They're no longer a legendary hero of the Horde, they're just a grunt who is expected to shut up and follow orders. Even after Sylvanas fucks off from the Horde, all loyalists are expected to pledge allegiance to the Horde or be locked in irons, but the champion never has to do this. There isn't even a moment in game where she gets to do that, even if only begrudgingly. The game just assumes she would. I get that the story isn't built to handle large diverging paths like this, but you'd think there'd be an event just for flavor where she can either eagerly pledge loyalty to the Horde, having only followed her war chief, or begrudgingly pledge allegiance to the Horde now that she has no other option after being abandoned by her queen. But no, the game assumes the champion will always go along with whatever Blizzard tells her to do, and I should point out that this kind of decision-making from Blizzard is the reason the Fate of Saurfang questline became one of the biggest sticking points in WoW. Because at first, Blizzard railroaded the player into betraying the Horde with no alternative and just assumed the players would be okay with that. This is what tells me that Sylvanas isn't going to be handled well in Shadowlands, because Blizzard just assumed the players would just instantly go, okay, she bad now, and obediently do their quests. They didn't expect players would want to have agency in a role-playing game, in the same expansion where they decided to hit the single most popular character in the entire damn franchise with the villain bat. And it's not like Blizzard can't do this. Everything from meaningless gossip text that does nothing but add flavor to entire separate quest lines have shown that Blizzard can give players agency. They want to have the champion be a renowned and famous hero to stroke the egos of the player base, but they don't want to have to deal with the fact that the champion being a main character might have to interfere with their vision. So when it's time for critical decisions to be made, the champion is expected to sit on the sidelines and follow orders like a good girl. And this is especially weird because a champion that sided with Sylvanas is arguably just as responsible for everything Sylvanas and Nathanos did. She's not only slain millions of people, she blighted her own soldiers when ordered to, and arguably had a hand in burning Teldrassil. Are we gonna pretend that didn't happen? I mean, depending on how you interpret the character, she is arguably the biggest war criminal Azeroth has ever seen. I really do feel as if this is about condescending to the player. The champion is constantly lauded and praised almost in spite of her actions at times, and is always treated like the greatest hero to Azeroth. And while players might sometimes argue that they wished they could just be a regular adventurer rather than the savior of Azeroth, I'd argue that most players like being constantly showered in praise, because in BFA they introduced a character who did treat players like they were nothing special, and the player base fucking hated him. If there was ever something to point to the fact that the desire to not be a special hero is just a nice sounding lie, it's the fact that one of the most enjoyable and delightful characters in the game quickly became the biggest hate sink for the player base. I'm serious, Nathanos is one of the funniest, hammiest characters ever put in the game. He's so delightfully nasty in that old school cartoon kind of way.
How uncouth for the queen of the tree elves, is it? No, I suppose that won't do. What exactly do you rule over these days?
The acting at play with Nathanos is some of the best the game has ever seen, second only to Laura Bailey as Jaina and Patty Mattson as Sylvanas. In the wrong hands, this could have easily been a generic edgy emo boy, but instead he's the perfect mix of ham and bastard. He's one of my favorite characters in the game, and yet despite being such a fucking delight and every line he speaks dripping with the best kind of narm, he is the single most hated character in the entire expansion. Yes, more hated than Gen, or Tyrande, or Malfurion, or Zakan, or Thrall. Like, Thrall is actually back in the story, the most despised character in the game at this point, and he's still less hated than Nathanos. Why? Because all those characters lick your boots, and Nathanos does not lick your boots. He only licks one person's boots, and that is not you. While other characters will bang on and on about how you're the best hope for the world, Nathanos has always been rather dismissive of the player and acts like he would be getting on with whatever he's doing without your help. And players don't like that. And they don't like to admit that. They've had to go as far as to make up a conspiracy theory about Nathanos being one of the writer's self-insert characters just to avoid having to admit to the real reason they don't like him. Players like being constantly lauded and praised, and Blizzard gives that to them for the sake of their own ego. But when the time comes for the consequences of the story to take hold, suddenly the player is just a regular adventurer again. But as Blizzard continues to make more and more controversial story decisions, continues to rewrite beloved characters on a whim to suit the latest fixation and twist, and continues to force players to suffer the presence of some of the most disliked characters in Warcraft's history, they're going to be brushing up more and more against the desire for player agency. The fate of Saurfang wasn't just a fluke. That happened because Blizzard decided to completely fuck with a lot of people's favorite character. And it's not the first time that's happened either. It was just the first time a character was popular enough to cause a significant outcry. But it'll happen again, especially as Blizzard continues to shun characters the player base actually likes in favor of characters who are increasingly starting to irritate them. People are going to want agency in an RPG. They're going to want to not have to side with characters they find objectionable. They're going to want a choice, even if that choice is like the loyalist path where you will lose in the end. That's something people are going to increasingly demand. I'm going to say the thing that's going to make you uncomfortable. Not everyone was mortified about the burning of Teldrassil. In an expansion about killing the other faction, killing a bunch of the other faction was not guaranteed to make people agree that the Horde had gone too far, and that should be the tiniest amount of agency that the player should be allowed to have. To be told by the devs that I'm not supposed to be happy that my character's most hated enemies were killed in a war against them is odd. But even that is something the devs have a hard time grappling with. I rolled Horde because I wanted to play Horde. I didn't want to play a slightly dirtier alliance. But with Bane and Thrall heading the new Horde Council along with Kalia Menethil being slated as the new Forsaken Queen, it really does feel like the faction I chose is just being supplanted by alliance puppets. And the Horde's greatest champion doesn't get a say in that. What's the solution? I don't really have a solution other than for Blizzard to pick a lane. Is the champion really Azeroth's greatest hero? If so, she should probably be able to do more than march in lockstep with every other character. In which case, the story is going to have to be more malleable to account for player agency. Are we just a soldier? In that case, maybe stop having random soldiers become the savior of Azeroth, because it'll only cause more problems the more players aren't allowed to have agency in the story. Champion or murder hobo? You have to pick one. It can't be both.